Is it just me? Is it just me? Hold up. I can't be the only one facing this where the Rocketeer drops me and then stays right there to make sure that I did not get revived.
I want to take a look through a few of the Panasonic have and explore the differences to help you decide on which camera you may want to buy or rent for your next project. So let's get into it. Starting with the S5 II and the S5 IIX, which actually share quite a lot, including their body design, apart from the S5 IIX's blackout paint job. They both have the same 24 megapixel full frame sensor, which can capture some excellent looking images. They are both jam-packed with video and photography features, have great color profiles and science, fantastic stabilization, and these cameras were a big step forward for Panasonic's autofocus system, with them both featuring a phase detect and contrast hybrid system. However, there are some clear differences between them, and really what it comes down to is the X is the more video focused out of the two. The X is just £200 extra over the S5 II and does everything the S5 II does with these extra features on top. This includes external SSD recording, all internal recording formats, ProRes up to 5.9K in 42HQ to an external SSD, 10-bit 42 S&Q options, external RAW output, live streaming capabilities, and USB tethering. Otherwise, as we've said, they share the same excellent range of features. For some more photography-focused users, the £200 price saving may be worth it to put into a new lens or other accessory. But for more video-focused users, I would strongly suggest the X version. These cameras are both priced incredibly well now considering their specs and what they can do. Even though they are a couple of years old now, they can still produce excellent images and are fantastic to use. Up next we have the S5 IIX and the S1 IIe. The S1 IIe is one of Panasonic's two new cameras that were recently released, and it surprisingly does share quite a lot with the S5 IIX. The biggest thing that they share is their sensor specifications, which are very, very similar. They are both full-frame 24 megapixel sensors with very similar looking images, base ISOs, and readout times. However, the S1 II does have some clear physical differences to the S5 IIX, but they are certainly very similar in overall design. They are both dust and splash resistant and have a nicely integrated fan system for more reliable recording times. For these example side-by-side shots, we are using an S5 II, but they are similar as we already mentioned, so of course it's still worth mentioning the S5 IIX's blackout paint job compared to the S1 IIe's typical regular S-Series one. The S1 IIe features the same updated body design that the S1 II and the S1R2 also have. It's a bit bulkier than the S5 II cameras, but still feels compact, dense, and nice in the hands. On the left side of the S1 IIe, you now have a new mode dial where you can switch between stills, video, and slow and quick modes really quickly, which the S5 IIs don't have. Your different mode dials and the media door can be locked as well, whereas the S5 IIX's cannot. The top control dial and rear AF buttons have also changed position ever so slightly. I think the dial position change is a great one. Similar to the S1H, the S1 IIe also has a front record button, which the S5 IIs do not, and this comes in really helpful when filming. Next, we have an upgraded massive OLED viewfinder and a tilty, fully rotating LCD, which means you can tilt the monitor up while still having cables plugged in. This mechanism should be standard across mirrorless cameras, as it makes the camera so much better to use in a range of different situations. The cameras share a very similar array of inputs and outputs, however the S1 IIe's covers are now individual versus the S5 II's, which can cover multiple ports. This can result in slightly cleaner rig configurations. The S1 IIe also has a new shutter closing function, which you can toggle on and off that the S5 II's don't. In the menu, you can toggle whether you want this to be open or closed when you power down the camera. It's rated up to 400,000 actuations and has a very satisfying clunk to it. The S5 IIX has a dual SD card slot, whereas the S1 IIe has a single SD card and a CF Express Type B slot. There are a bunch of affordable Type B cards now, and I personally find them much better and more reliable than SD. They're a faster, more modern media type, so in my opinion, a better media to invest into and use. The S1 IIe also has improved tally lamps over these cameras. The S5 IIX was already a fantastically featured video camera with an excellent range of recording formats and features, but the S1 IIe elevates that even more. The S1 IIe features everything that the S5 IIX does, but with a range of key video-focused improvements. The first has to do with the ProRes formats. The S1 IIe can record ProRes and ProRes RAW internally to CF Express Type B cards or externally to a USB-C SSD, whereas the S5 IIX can only record ProRes to an external SSD, not internally, and ProRes RAW can only be recorded externally via HDMI with a compatible Atomos recorder. This is a pretty big addition, as it makes shooting higher quality codecs much easier and more reliable. The S1 IIe can also shoot 4K at 6K 60. Using the full width of the sensor and a 2.4:1 aspect ratio, versus the S5 II, which can only record up to 4K 60 with an APS-C crop. The S1 IIe also now features false color, which is a fantastic addition to see, and something that is unfortunately missing in the S5 II cameras. The S1 IIe, S1 II, and S1R2 will also be getting the ability to shoot ARRI Log C3 with an upcoming firmware update, though you will need to buy the DMW SF3 upgrade key to get access to it. Regardless, this is a cool addition, and I can't wait to test it out in these cameras. There will also be a firmware update, though you will need to IIe, S1 II, and S1R2 will also be getting the ability to shoot ARRI Log C3 with an upcoming firmware update, though you will need to buy the DMW SF3 upgrade key to get access to it. Regardless, this is a cool addition, and I can't wait to test it out in these cameras. There will also be a firmware update coming that will enable the S1R2, S1 II, and the S1 IIe to use multiple frame markers at the same time. This will be great when shooting 3x2 and wanting to frame at length for both 16x9 and 9x16, which has become too common now. The S1 II and the IIe are also compatible with Panasonic's optional XLR2 top units, which not only provide XLR inputs and much better physical audio controls, but also the ability to record 32-bit flow audio, which is still, for some reason, very rare to see in cameras. This top unit isn't compatible with the S5 II or the 2X. When it comes to connectivity as well, the S1 II and IIe have built-in wireless live streaming capabilities, are UVC and UAC compliant, which will make them easy to use for webcam or for streaming through something like OBS, and can be towards video content creators. The S1 IIs also have updated autofocus systems, with a new urban sports subject tracking mode for sports like dancing, football, skateboarding, and parkour. High frame rate autofocus is also improved with the new cameras within the S5 IIs. We tested this side by side, and there's a night and day difference. Panasonic stabilization was already class leading, and the S1 II system is even better than the one in the S5 IIs. The S1 IIe and S1 II are both rated for up to 8 stops of stabilization and feature their new cropless mode that the S5 IIs don't have. This new mode corrects distortion at the edges of the frame without cropping the image, whereas the standard and high modes crop into your field of view to help give you a more stable image.
That's a pretty nice convertible.
This is a decent improvement over the S5 II system, though the S5 II is still very good. The S1 II cameras also have new extended control of the manual focus parameters of L-mount lenses. This includes the direction of the focus ring rotation and the ability to control what the focus ring does when you're in autofocus. This means you can assign something like aperture control to your lens when using autofocus, and then when you hit manual focus, this changes back to manual focus, which is a cool way to make use of the control ring when you're not needing it for focus. The S5 II cameras do not have these features. The S1 II and IIe also have a new copy and backup function, which allows you to take your rushes from the internal media of your camera, offload them onto an external SSD, which you can connect via the USB-C port on the side of the camera. This is such a great new feature. It was really good for filmmakers and photographers who wants to offload while on location without using a laptop or another offload device. The S1 IIe also has a bunch of photography features and spec improvements over the S5 IIX as well. This includes a slightly improved mechanical shutter frame rate of 10 frames per second over the S5 IIX's 9, though they do share the same maximum of 30 frames per second when using the electronic shutter mode. The S1 IIe is also Capture One compatible, can shoot HEIF compressed images, has a new AI auto white balance function, and a multiple exposure mode. All of these features the S5 II doesn't have, whereas all of the S5 II's features are crammed into the S1 IIe. They are both great stills cameras though, and can capture good looking imagery very constantly. The S5 IIX is priced at £1,795 and the S1 IIe is priced at £2,399. So is the extra £600 for the S1 IIe worth it? Well, it depends. The S1 IIe is the best version of the sensor used in the S5 II cameras. It has loads of features crammed into it, can record in almost too many different video formats, it has the best stabilization that Panasonic have done, with the restrictions that we implement this and what your priorities are as a creative. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you want to buy anything you see in this video or any other filmmaking or photography gear, head up to cvp.com where our experienced team is waiting to help you. So next we have the two new S-Series cameras, the S1 II and the S1 IIe. These share quite a lot, which we've covered in the S5 IIX comparison. They use the same body design, media, battery, menu system, updated autofocus systems, and range of updated video and photography features. And they have one big difference, the sensors that they use, and this changes a lot. As we mentioned earlier, the E features similar sensor technology to the S5 II and IIX, whereas the S1 II features a new partially stacked full-frame 24-megapixel sensor, which means this sensor is faster than non-stacked sensors, but slower than fully stacked sensors like the ones found in the Nikon Z8 or Z9. This means full-frame 24-megapixel sensor, which means this sensor is faster than non-stacked sensors, but slower than fully stacked sensors like the ones found in the Nikon Z8 or Z9. This means that Panasonic have managed to pull some impressive speed out of the S1 II. It can shoot up to 70 frames per second in its electronic shutter mode, whereas the S1 IIe tops out at 30 frames per second, though both of them are limited to 10 frames per second when in mechanical shutter mode. The S1 II is also faster than the S1 IIe when shooting 14-bit stills in both mechanical and electronic shutter modes. It also means that the S1 II is faster in video as well. When it comes to high frame rate video, the S1 II can capture 60 frames per second in 6K, up to 120 in 3.3 and 4K, and 240 in Full HD, whereas the S1 IIe can only shoot 6K up to 60 frames per second in a 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio, 4K up to 60, and Full HD up to 180. So there are clear differences between the two. However, the slow motion footage from both of them looks pretty good. The S1 II also has a faster readout speed compared to the S1 IIe. In the 6K 3x2 open game, we can see that the S1 II has a speed of just under 16 milliseconds, whereas the S1 IIe is much higher at just over 26 milliseconds. The S1 II's readout speed does increase when you enable the dynamic range boost mode, whereas the S1 IIe does not feature a boost mode function. This boost mode gives the S1 II an extra stop's worth of dynamic range at the expense of readout speed. So in situations where you can shoot and be happy with a higher readout speed, you can get even more dynamic range than it already has. We managed to test the latitude of both of these cameras, which we cover in our more in-depth S1 II review. A long story short, between these two cameras, the S1 II does win out with its boost mode on and off. If you want to see how it compares to other cameras as well, check out our full video, links to which are in the description. Both cameras have dual base ISOs, but they are slightly different. When shooting in Panasonic Speedlog Profile.
No, I didn't know you could treat Instagram like Safari. I thought you could get the username on paper.
Sony recently announced the A7R6, an 8K filmmaking monster of a camera with 32-bit flip audio and the first new battery technology from Sony in 8 years. This camera also reveals, in my opinion, a lot of the cards that Sony's going to be playing whenever they announce an eventual FX312 in PS4. So in this video, I want to look at what Sony has revealed already and make some educated guesses about what is coming next, because these future cameras are shaping up to be very exciting looking. We're going to divide this video up into 3 parts too. Things that I believe are guaranteed to be coming. Well, as opposed to guarantee something whenever you are speculating. Then in part 2, we're going to talk about things that I'm making a guess at that are probably coming, but who knows for sure. Lastly, we're going to cover some specs and features that are mine and many filmmakers' hopes and dreams, curveballs that if so great that would be special. Let's start with speculation. I don't know anything special. Starting first with the body of the cameras, Mark II, and a big upgrade that I would be absolutely shocked if Sony did and that is the articulating EDF from the FX2. A lot of filmmakers didn't like the FX2, mostly due to it being a great camera body paired with a bad sensor that had a problem recording videos. Yes, but one of the nicest features of that camera was the it was absolutely a joy to use. I would not be surprised at all if Sony included that EDF in all their future compact cinema cameras. Sadly, I doubt that we will see this EDF also come to the A7S, or as Sony has shown with their photography focused cameras, they won't that. But to have good news, Sony did add a front tally light to the A706 that lights up whenever you're recording. It Next, finally, is another hardware that I would truly shop if they did not use it. We have the new Bionix XR2 chip and the battery system that we first saw introduced with the A7R6. These NP-SA100 batteries offer 17% longer battery life, but more importantly, they offer a higher voltage of 7.82 volts, up from 7.2 on the older NP-FC100 batteries. And this is just a theory, but I believe that this more efficient processor in these new cameras, paired with the extra voltage from the batteries, unlocks extra capabilities in the A7R6, and that will also unlock these capabilities with future Sony cameras like an FX3 Mark II and A7S IV. What kind of capabilities? Well, look at the accessories that the A7R6 supports versus the A7 V, which is barely a half a year older, but that camera used tech. With the A7R6, on the other hand, Sony was able to introduce a new XLR top hot shoe mount, the XLR A4, which added a very exciting feature, 32-bit float audio recording internally to the camera. My theory is that we need to turn our attention to bigger speculations, and we need to talk about features that Sony has never included in them that is OpenGate, or if you want to use it. $66.8 million, 16 stops in dynamic range, 14-bit lossless RAW files at up to 30 frames per second blackout free, the first fully stacked sensor in its series, 5.6 times faster readout than its predecessor, 10-bit 8K video up to 30 frames per second, and 4K up to 120. The dual gain implementation that no other Sony Alpha 1 has. This is the Sony Alpha 7 Mark 6. And it's kind of a problem for me, because I bought two Alpha 1 Mark IIs. I went all the way in right when they came out, thinking I wouldn't even need to think about another camera for at least a few years. Now that the A7R6 exists, I'm trying to figure out if I should sell one of my A1s and grab one of these instead. So in this video, we're going to look at what's actually exciting, what's just hype, and who should be seriously considering this new system. The sensor readout speed because of its high resolution. The A7R5, as good as it was, had a readout of 0.3 milliseconds. The A7R6 improves on this massively and adds a bunch of new features with two major updates inside the line. First of all, the brand new 66.8 megapixel sensor in the A7R6 is a fully stacked sensor, similar to the flagship Alpha 1 Mark II, so it is way faster than the previous one. This new sensor has a 5.6 times faster readout than the A7R5, which brings it down to somewhere around 17.5 milliseconds, which is much more manageable than 90 milliseconds. I did a roll and shutter test for this camera side by side against my Alpha 1 Mark II, which has a readout at about 3.8 milliseconds, and the difference between the two in my test was extremely pronounced. That is a massive shift, but the sensor doesn't do the work alone. The other half of this story is the new Bionix XR2 processor, the same one that we recently saw added to the Sony A7 V. Sony took the main processing chip and AI chip, which used to be two separate chips in previous cameras, and they combined them into one. That unified processor is more powerful and more efficient, making everything that this camera can like 30 frames per second burst speeds at full 14-bit lossless compressed RAW. That's the same speed as the flagship A1 Mark II, but with more resolution. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg for what this sensor and processor combo can do. When I went into the press briefing for this camera, I was genuinely excited. The specs made it sound like a big deal, and then I spent a week shooting with it. I went to downtown Victoria, did some street photography, out to Macaulay Point to shoot some comparison tests with the A1 II, over to the gardens at HCP where I tried to capture the flowers and the beautiful scenery, doing comparisons, crop tests in 4K 120 and 8K, burst shooting, pre-capture, lots of photos, lots of videos, and the honest headline is this. It really felt similar to my A1 Mark II, which is definitely a good thing, and it just happens to cost significantly less than it. 66.8 megapixels in practice is really satisfying. Video had the same quality, same feel, no surprise there, but good to confirm, especially on a photo-first camera. Dynamic active mode showed a marginal improvement in my walking test compared to the A1 Mark II. Not night and day by any means, but the new stabilization unit is definitely doing something in there. 30 frames per second burst shooting, like I mentioned before, and the pre-capture both worked exactly as advertised. As of right now, Lightroom and Capture One don't fully support A7R6 RAW files, which is pretty standard for a new unreleased camera. This will sort itself out in the next little while, as it always does. I've actually been playing around with some of the raw files in DaVinci Resolve's new photo editing page. I'm not 100% sure why I'm able to work with them there, but I am. So overall, I do think that maybe I got a little more excited than I needed to at first. It is definitely an amazing piece of gear, but if you're familiar with any of Sony's cameras in the past handful of years, these deals will be pretty similar. So that's the short version. But let's slow things down a bit and dive more into what this camera has to offer. On the photo side of things, R stands for resolution. So I mentioned the 66.8 megapixel sensor up from the previous 61. And the number by itself is just kind of a number, but what it actually means in practice is that the image on the shot will have like tons of room. I was out shooting in APS-C mode, which crops into the sensor by 1.5 times to start with, and I still have a ton of resolution left to a 1 Mark II. And actually, I'm definitely impressed. Autofocus on a camera that's this resolution heavy could be a point, but it wasn't. Face detection, eye detection, subject tracking, it all worked exactly the way that I expected it to. It's hard to tell if it
Is the Sony A7 Mark V and A1 II killer? That's the question that I've been out to answer for, honestly, primarily in a wildlife and landscape scenario for photo and video, but mostly photography in Grand Teton National Park in Yellowstone, where I stood it for the 9.3. In my opinion, that is not the biggest differentiating factor between these two cameras. The inside definitely is, because the sensors are very different. The Sony A7 Mark V has a new partially stacked sensor and has a slightly faster readout speed because of that. What does that mean? You get less rolling shutter in both photo and video, and the readout speed is somewhere around 14 milliseconds. For the Sony A1 Mark II, you've got a fully stacked sensor with significantly fast readout speeds. They're about 3 times as fast as the Sony A7 Mark V. A1 II has a 50 megapixel sensor, whereas the A7 V has a 33 megapixel sensor. Notably, both of these cameras have the same burst photo rate, which is, in my opinion, very surprising. The Sony A7 Mark V can do 30 frames per second burst, while the A1 II can also do 30 frames per second burst. first. But jumping to the video spec differences between these two, the A12 is capable of 8K30 and also 4K 120 uncropped notably, while the A75 A120 with an APS-C crop. So from a pure image standpoint, they have very similar qualities, but with a 50 megapixel sensor, you would expect more detail from the Sony A1 Mark II, and of course, it delivers on that. So if you're someone who's looking for a higher resolution camera, maybe you're shooting archival photos, maybe you're shooting landscape photos, and you want the most amount of detail possible, honestly, in any scenario where you want more detail, Sony A75, so they will that screen. Sony A1 has a 440 screen. Sony A75 is a 2.8 million screen. So there's about 500 screens there. Here we go to the shots of that screen. Yes, virtual switch. There's a little bit more detail. This shade is more hard, and this shade. This is like very close to me, the difference is very much. Okay, now let's take a look at the A1. The A1 has the base all the way back. Only when the A1 is closer, I recognition. Sometimes it gets up on the ground, not really line, or the A75 is still about to. I have actually.
The Sony A706 is here in
Today, I'm going to compare the Sony A75 and the Lumix S1 Mark II. My biggest problem with comparing these two cameras is they are not necessarily in the same bracket. So, like category, each camera for 2 is technically $300 more expensive than the A75. I guess in this comparison, we'll see the 2 is technically $300 more expensive cameras, but this is going to be as close as I can get in terms of price bracket, even though the Lumix S1 Mark II is technically $300 more expensive than the A75. And I guess in this comparison, we'll see if it is worth the additional $300. And also, I am a videographer, filmmaker, cinematographer, content creation, feedback trash. So I'm going to be focused more on the
video side of what these cameras are capable of. We'll at the end cover some photography aspects of these cameras, and what I'll be focusing on with regards to these cameras and photography are the lenses that I will talk about. Later in the video, if you're new to my channel, I have been a Sony shooter for over a decade. Ever since I started doing this stuff, I was a Sony shooter. Until recently, in about July 2025, I switched entirely to Lumix because I had the opportunity to try out the Lumix S1 Mark II and using it, looking at the image quality, seeing how it works. I completely switched over. Although I am primarily a Lumix shooter now, I own two Lumix S1 Mark IIs, an S9 and an S1 IIe. I did buy the Sony a7 IV, so both of these cameras were purchased with my money. So if there is any bias, there's nothing that I can say with my mouth to prove to you that I'm unbiased. I'll just let you decide, what am I going to do? It's your opinion. I'm not the Lumix S1 Mark II or the Sony a7 IV as your next camera, your first camera, whatever it may be. With that said, I guess we just end this video now since the a7 IV doesn't have open gate, so it is complete rubbish. I have no use for it. Obviously, that is not real. But what is real is my opinion, and that this is legitimately my opinion and it's not paid for by Lumix or Sony, because this video is absolutely not sponsored by either Lumix or Sony. However, this video is sponsored by Luma AI and its Dream Machine feature, which is a collection of features that helps you plan, organize, and create various AI projects. I use it to light the camera on fire. It's quite simple. All I did was upload a screenshot of the last frame of the file, a prompt, and it gave me various results. And if I wanted to modify the results, I could easily just hit modify and add in whatever additional prompts that I want to get an updated result. I even gave it a prompt to have a dinosaur walk into one of my videos. How I would consistently use Luma AI Dream Machine is to make content out of a consistent reference. Meaning if I made a character, say a robot from a Lumix S1 Mark II camera, all I had to do was upload a photo of Lumix S1 Mark II camera and prompt Dream Machine to create a transforming robot referencing the Lumix S1 Mark II photo that I uploaded. There's the feature called keyframe, which allows me to create a video with a starting keyframe to an ending keyframe. Many use this to create camera movement from point A to B, but I use it to transform the camera into the robot that it created to make sure I gave Dream Machine as close, as detailed of a prompt as possible. I use its annotate feature, which allows me to draw detailed directions and even include text prompts within the image to assist the AI to creating a result closest to my idea as possible. I had the starting frame as the camera, and I had the ending frame as the final form of the robot. I gave it a prompt robot, and I get my results. And if I wanted to continue creating content with this exact robot, I can use character reference to make additional photos and videos. Here I created an image of the robot square animations at 16:9 only. The video 16:9 is more of a ratio. You get 16:9, 3:2 height and width of the sensor. The same aspect ratio you get each photo on these cameras. The Sony a7 IV is stuck at 16:9. Monster in this video. The fact that the Lumix S1 Mark II can film with multi-gig, which means it's not just limited to 16:9, 3:2, the full height and width of the sensor, the same aspect ratio you get each photo on these cameras. The Sony a7 IV is stuck at 16:9 only. The video 16:9 is more of a rectangular shaped image, whereas 3:2 is closer to square, which means that you get more height, additional space to be able to shoot horizontal, crop to 16:9, whatever you want, but also you have more ever to a vertical crop without having to make any adjustments on your lens, moving back or to compensate, be able to recrop without being too tight or whatever, for your content, video, whatever. Because it does do 6K and Sony is limited to 4K, you have a ton of resolution, so when you're doing a vertical video, you're still getting full 4K resolution, even though you're cropping into the vertical portion of your image. Other than that, OpenGate is going to be very useful for anamorphic, because naturally anamorphic is going to stretch out your image, giving you black bar stop bottom, depending on how much of a stretch the anamorphic lens is. With OpenGate, you will have less black bars, obviously, so it's beneficial for anamorphic as well. So first of all, let's talk about build quality of these two cameras. You're paying around $3,000 for these cameras, so the quality is going to be as expected. Lumix viewfinder is better. I think the Lumix screen is overall better, even though I believe the A7 V should have more overall dots. Something about these Sony screens just do not perform as well as Lumix and other Canon and stuff that I've seen. For some reason, it lacks contrast or details or something like that. I feel like I could just look better. The colors look better on the Lumix SMR2 display. That is my opinion. Whatever. But however, Sony A7 V has no tally lights at all. I mean,
so if you watch this channel for a little while, then you know I love Canon cameras, the DJI Ronin 4D, and Lumix cameras. For a lot of my documentary work, I use the Ronin 4D and the Canon C400 with some of the Canon mirrorless hybrids, Nikon ZR, as well as foot. Fun. So I'll touch on photos a little bit near the end of this video, but primarily we're going to be focused on the video features and video quality of these four cameras. Now, I have historically been a Canon shooter. Those were my first cameras. I've used the C100, the C200, the C300, the C70, which is shooting me now, and I'm currently shooting a feature documentary on the C400 and C50. So I'm very comfortable with Canon, and I've used them for a long time. And the Canon R6 III, which is basically a almost identical twin to the C50 with just a few modifications. And then I've also, over the years, used Lumix quite often. I first grabbed the GH5 because I needed a small gimbal cam to go with my Red Helium that also shot 4K and 10-bit 422, and it was really the only mirrorless camera at the time that could do that. And since Lumix has now put a lot of their efforts into full frame, I have loved their full frame cameras. The S1H was just an incredible camera, one of the first mirrorless cameras to be Netflix approved, and I've used on a lot of shoots as well. Their newest models, the Panasonic S1R2 and S12, are also beautiful cameras, and I'm using both of them as a B and C cam to my Ronin 4D on another feature documentary that has been shooting for the past 18 months. Sony I shot with for a little bit in my career, mostly with the Sony FS5 and the A7R2 for my Netflix original documentaries, Heroin and Recovery Boys. And I love the form factor of the FS5 and enjoyed the fact that Sony was a full frame camera compared to my GH5, which was a Micro Four Thirds, but I never loved the image or the colors, and so as soon as the rest of the camera industry caught up with the specifications of the Sony, I ditched Sony and went back to Canon and also Red. And then Nikon I've never used until the last couple weeks. I really touched the Nikon camera, except for maybe my mom DSLR when I was 12 years old. Brand new to Nikon, pretty excited to try it out and see how it stacks up against the rest of the pack. Alright, so the categories we're going to be going through for these four cameras are overall features, menu system, different codecs, their color, so each camera has the best color science, overall image quality, just what I think